Star Wars. So, this is a franchise that I think you watch a lot when you're younger, but then as you get older, you do start to kind of pull away, you start to get other things, and it might be years in between a rewatch. But here's the thing, Star Wars is weird for me because it's one of those franchises that seemingly never seem to go away. Like, it always seems to have been around. And apparently some of the other cast think that as well, as remember when Mark Hamill appeared on an episode of Jamie and Jimmy's Friday Night Feast, he said that one of the things that surprised him about Star Wars was that it never went away. Like, when they were making Star Wars in the 1970s, when it first came out, it was really popular, and he kind of was speaking with his cast, and they're like, okay, yeah, it's popular now, but just wait a year or so, it'll die down, everybody will move on to the next big thing, and it'll have had its time. But they were surprised when it just seemingly never went away. And one time he was speaking to Carrie Fisher about it, apparently, and she said, look, listen, I am Princess Leia, you're Luke, this has happened, just get over it. And Star Wars was released in 1977, at least the first one was, A New Hope, and 46 years later it's still going strong, and it's seemingly never gone away. Now, in terms of my childhood with Star Wars in general, I grew up in the early 2000s where VHS was still a thing. I mean, it would eventually be phased out by DVD. But I remember for the first few years of my life, we had the VHS tapes of The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. And we later got the DVDs of Revenge of the Sith through to Return of the Jedi. And in terms of Star Wars on the big screen for me, I have a vague memory in the back of my head that 2005 I might have seen Revenge of the Sith in cinemas, but I have no idea if that's actually true or whether that's just something I'm misremembering. However, I did go to the cinema to see when the new trilogy came out, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. I also saw Rogue One in cinemas when it happened. I didn't see Solo, which, from what I've seen, people are rather split on whether Solo is actually a good film. But in terms of Star Wars as well, it's one of those franchises that has never gone away, including on the small screen with TV shows like The Clone Wars and a load of stuff on Disney+, which I have not seen, including The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and Kenobi. However, surprisingly enough, the area of Star Wars that I actually have seemingly managed to kind of keep all these years was the games. Because I remember once again growing up that on the PS2 we had the original versions of Battlefront and Battlefront 2. I remember I wasn't very good at them. I usually lost most matches, but I do remember playing those two versions of Battlefront, and while I never played it, I do know that a member of my family had Knights of the Old Republic and played it. And I think another area of Star Wars that I did actually remember playing was the mobile Star Wars expansion of Angry Birds, which Angry Birds, a Star Wars expansion, that seems weird. But I think the area of Star Wars that I distinctly remember kind of keeping for all these years was the Lego games released by LucasArts and TT Games. I remember playing through Star Wars, Lego Star Wars, the video game, the original trilogy, the complete saga, which was basically those two games smushed together into one, which was still fairly fun. The version of the Clone Wars, which, while I've never seen the Clone Wars TV show, I do remember playing Lego Star Wars The Clone Wars, just purely because it was a Lego Star Wars game, so it's still pretty good. And at the minute, I am working my way through Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, which, I'll admit, it's not quite the same as the other Lego Star Wars games I played, which all had a degree of, they were good games, but they were fairly simple, and while they were simple, that actually worked in their favours. I mean, the characters didn't talk yet, I think because they hadn't quite worked out how to make it look good, or how to kind of make it really work with them. So they just had the characters do mumbles like, yeah, stuff like that. But I will admit, the Skywalker Saga, while I don't know if it's as kind of simple as some of the previous games, the other games were simple, but they were playable and quaint and charming. This one is a bit more complicated and maybe not as kind of faithful as those, but to speak good of it, it looks absolutely beautiful. I mean, this is probably one of the best LEGO games that TT Games created with Star Wars. I mean, they've managed all these years to actually make it look good, and it looks beautiful. I mean, you can have levels such as the Mos Espa pod race or the Speeder showdown, and they can make it look beautiful and make it look good. So, yeah. But, as I said, the original Star Wars, I do remember I saw it on DVD a couple of years ago, but I thought it had been a few years, and like I did with Harry Potter at one point, I eventually thought, it's been a couple of years since I watched them. Maybe I should just stick on A New Hope, just to once again watch it through. And I'm glad I did, because this film now is 46 years old, and it's lovely. I mean, yes, you are just going to have people who don't particularly like Star Wars or are not big fans of Star Wars IP, but looking back on it, for a film that came out in 1977, this is damn impressive. Like, as people have noted, the story isn't anything particularly that extraordinary, but it was the effects and the kind of style that drew people in. George Lucas had a vision for this. He managed to do it on a relatively small budget, and with a great cast including Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, Alec Guinness, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, Peter Mayhew, David Prowse, and James Earl Jones, they managed to turn in a damn good product with it. I will admit there are some areas that are a little cheesy and really don't make sense, but then you got so many iconic lines of dialogue, like, aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? Just, you've got those moments, and even some moments that I wasn't even aware of. Like, I knew that there was the iconic argument about who shot first, Han Solo or Greedo. And when Han Solo first showed up in this, when I was watching the film last night, they just suddenly switched to them meeting Ben Kenobi and Luke meeting Han Solo and Chewbacca, and I was just thinking, oh, they cut it out because of the controversy? But then it does happen, and I think, I'm not quite sure, but I think Greedo goes for his gun, but then Han manages to get there first. At least that's what I saw. But, once again, I can't really say anything more about Star Wars that hasn't already been said already, but if you haven't watched A New Hope in a couple of years, just go back and watch it, give it another chance, because I remember How I Met Your Mother had a rule that if you don't watch Star Wars at least once every 3 years, then the dark side wins. I probably haven't seen it in about 7 years or something. It was one of those things I just never got around to, but I finally decided last night to stick it back on, and you know what? Star Wars, I think, still has a place in my heart. Although, it does also, last thing before I really turn off, it does also surprise me how many big names actually ended up in the Star Wars franchise. Like, I remember watching The Phantom Menace through, and I never had the hate that everybody else seemed to have with The Phantom Menace. But looking back years later, I didn't even realise at the time that was Liam Neeson. Like, maybe in my brain, I just kind of thought that Liam Neeson's career started with stuff like Batman Begins and Taken. Like, I never really cottoned on that was him. But yeah, there's also Richard E. Grant shows in one of the later films, to which I think Richard E. Grant is the perfect person to play a Star Wars, not necessarily a big villain like Darth Vader or the General, but just someone to play a member of the dark side, maybe just an officer. He can look so mean, and he manages to pull the role off. But yeah, there you go. There's my thoughts on kind of Star Wars, kind of the world that I grew up in, that just had kind of embraced Star Wars by this point, and it's going to be a part of our lives for many more generations to come. There you go. That's my quick little thoughts on Star Wars. I might do another small one of these if I end up watching The Empire Strikes Back at some point, but for now, I've rewatched Star Wars A New Hope. And until next time, see ya.